Welcome back, people. Lateness is greatness. I have a very, very special guest on today, Raphael Honigstein. It is an absolute pleasure, man. I've been watching you growing up on ESPN, now BT Sport, and obviously The Athletic. How are you doing? And thank you for joining me today.
I'm absolutely fine. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for hanging up that shirt just for me in the background.
Of course. It has to be done. When I told my dad that I was having you on, he was like, right, let me go and get my German shirt. And I was like, all right, go ahead, go on. So there's so much to go through this half an hour special. Obviously, thank you so much to the chat for joining us. Already, they're very excited to have you. You know, they're extremely excited. So guys, put in your questions and hopefully I can get to them as well. I've got my own artillery to go through as well. I want to start off with Chelsea, of course. Thomas Tuchel, another German coach in the league. What have you made of him in the first, few weeks? 5 games, 1 goal conceded. That was a goal that we saw with Rudiger, putting it into his own net. So really, it's been a very solid start for him, a manager that hasn't had much time to implement his philosophy, not much time in between the training days. Just very, briefly, what have you made of Chelsea so far through the reign?
Well, I can't say I'm really surprised that he's done well. I thought he would immediately help Chelsea with a bit of structure, with a bit of confidence. This was a team that seemed to be tactically and also emotionally lost before he came in. And I thought that maybe with 1 or 2 tweaks and a bit of slightly different tonality, big changes, big improvements could be seen fairly quickly. And I think that's exactly what's happened. It's not the finished product yet. I think he's still trying to find out certain things about his players, trying to tweak the system to fit the players and vice versa. But they've built a bit of momentum and they look a lot happier on the pitch and off it. And I think that's always going to make a big difference in a league where any side with a few good results can actually, have a pretty big impact, as we've seen already with Chelsea in recent weeks.
Yeah, a lot of people are putting it down to obviously the extra knowledge and tactical detail that he's given to the team. A lot of the players have come out in the media and said that as well in their post-match interviews. Of course, the new manager bounce always applies. We've seen it even with Solskjaer and Manchester United a few years ago as well. A lot of the Chelsea fans are wondering and pondering, we have seen Tuchel use a variety of different formations and systems at old clubs. Dortmund, we saw him use the 3 at the back. Pulisic acted as this, wide right mid player. Same you're seeing with Hudson-Odoi. PSG, he went more of the back 4, obviously maybe to implement, Neymar and Mbappe up front a lot easier. Chelsea, obviously, so far have played a back 3. Do you expect him to change it up with we've played a lot of low blocks, I'd say, in his first few games. Do you think he's going to change it up going into the games against Atletico, Manchester United, Southampton upcoming? Or do you think he's trying to stick to a rigid system because it's obviously a short-term situation trying to get to the Champions League in the Premier League?
Flexibility is Tuchel's tactical identity. He likes to change things, not just between games, but also during games. He's kind of famous for that. I don't think he's perhaps as extreme as he used to be at Mainz, where changing was one of the ways how he surprised opposition teams by just having all these different systems and they just weren't ready for it. But I think he wants his teams to be really flexible, adaptable, able to change in games, able to adjust to opposition. So he's absolutely going to tweak it. And I think it's really important to understand that, the idea that he needs to find his best formation, his best 11, is not something that enters in his mind at all. He doesn't think along those terms. He will think about who will give the best solutions for any particular game. And if that means, playing in a certain system one game and playing another game in a completely different shape, then he will do that. So that's his style. But I think the encouraging thing is, or the thing that people can put a lot of confidence in, is that he knows what he's doing. So perhaps unlike maybe slightly more inexperienced managers who change and then get lost themselves in the constant change, he does it for very good reasons and he does it for a purpose, and it tends to work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm excited. So far, what I've seen, obviously, I want to address the media aspect. Obviously, you're very much involved in that, but he starting with solutions. Timo Werner and Kai Havertz are clearly looking for a solution in different ways in terms of bringing out the best in them in terms of their form. We haven't seen Kai in the last few games, but Timo has been playing. He has been looking sharper and looking better. Obviously, the final product is still missing. What do you make of those two in terms of the adaptation from the Bundesliga to the Premier League and how he'll go about getting the best out of them? Because a lot of fans are now starting to feel when players come from the Bundesliga, are they equipped for the Premier League in terms of the vast contrast in styles of play, the high lines that you see in the Bundesliga, all of these things? Are you confident that those two will find their way in the Premier League under Tuchel?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily about the Bundesliga. It's about quality. You know, we've never heard anyone saying Kevin De Bruyne has not adjusted from the Bundesliga, or Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, or, you know, there's countless others. But people, I think, tend to more think of those who are problems or might have a harder time. I think with Werner and Havertz in particular, there was always, I think, bound to be a process. I think for Werner, the process is, he is a very specific type of striker. You know, he's not a winger. He's not a centre forward. He's not really number 10. He's a kind of a mix of all these things. And I think at Leipzig, they eventually figured out how to best play him, which was often off another centre forward. And I think that has been initially also Tuchel's idea. Sometimes he plays him alongside another guy in almost a double number 10 role behind the striker. But the idea is really to make it possible for him to use his pace, because if he's too far up and too close to the opposition back line, then he finds it very difficult to find that space. The encouraging thing is that in Aubameyang, Tuchel has managed to convert a player who was very similar, who was a hybrid between a striker and a winger, and he knew a lot of pace and always was best on the counter-attack. He taught Aubameyang to be much better in smaller spaces, to make those little runs that every centre forward makes, to be a bit more cute. And I think if Tuchel has a similar effect on Werner, the impact will be absolutely devastating. Havertz, I think, is a different story. I think with Havertz, there was always, at least in my mind, an anticipation that he will take a bit of time to get used to. Not so much, I think, because of the pace and the Premier League is being so different, but because he came into a team that was not really built to play Kai Havertz football. I mean, Kai Havertz is best when he has the ball. Kai Havertz is best when he's at the center of things, players moving around him, intricate patterns. A lot of people said he'd be better off going maybe to Spain or to Bayern Munich, who have a really defined possession game. Chelsea under Lampard were the opposite of that. Everything was about transition. Everything was about pace, being quite direct. But sometimes, you know, I'd see him play a false number 9 with his back to goal, and the balls would just come and fly over him, and you're thinking it's not his game. And I think he was always liable to be a bit more funny, more difficult because of those technical and stylistic reasons, rather than Premier League, Bundesliga being such a big dramatic change. I think it's the times of the football that is so different between what he used to play at Leverkusen. Obviously, COVID hasn't helped. Picking up another injury now hasn't helped. But again, I have very little doubt that he's going to be an absolute superstar. You just have to find the right system for him. And that's been my one concern throughout, that Chelsea, at least before Tuchel came, have not really been the kind of team where I thought Havertz would be a natural fit.
Yeah.
But eventually, one or two things has to happen. Either he becomes so good that Chelsea will have to adapt for him, or he has to adapt to play in that Chelsea team. But because both him and the team, I think, have a lot of talent, I expect it to happen.
Yeah, it's a player that at Leverkusen was really the epicenter of everything they did. And now suddenly a player that used to get maybe the most touches is now having to share that limelight with a Hakim Ziyech, who also has off getting on the ball. So you spoke about Timo Werner having to improve his fundamentals, maybe his first touch in the smaller spaces. So a lot of this stuff, guys, is mainly, I think, training ground kind of stuff, which is why it's not just going to be a snap of the fingers where you see them just instantly improve. Potentially even next season when they get a preseason, you might see bigger strides in their development. I want to go on to Rudiger as well, and really just the centre-backs in general, because we know, regardless of what formation Tuchel plays, he wants to play out from the back. And for me, Chelsea don't seem to have many ball-playing centre-backs. When Thiago Silva comes out of that, it's the gap in quality is obviously huge. They've been linked with Upamecano, Alaba. They've been linked with even Jerome Boateng. I don't know how concrete these links are. You probably know definitely more than me. But just in terms of Chelsea's search for a centre-back, do you think this is an issue, the fact that they don't have the ball playing centre backs back then, the likes of Kurt Zouma and maybe Rudiger as well, going forward for Tuchel into next season?
I think it is something that Tuchel will look at. I think he needs those ball-playing centre-backs. He needs the build-up from the back. I think he's willing to give the existing players a chance. I think Christensen has shown at Gladbach that he can play that kind of football. There may be more questions about his more defensive part of the game, if you will, man v man, but he is actually pretty good on the ball and very comfortable. Rudiger, yes, I agree with you. I think he's looked very good in recent games, but is not a Van Dijk, of course, in possession, and who is really, but he's not an Alaba, not a Boateng either. So I think that is one area that Chelsea will look at very, very closely. Perhaps alongside with a new centre forward. You get the sense that maybe that's another thing that they might see if they can improve it. Might not always be possible. But I don't think that the situation is bad. I think that the centre backs that are there now, and you saw that, are pretty good in possession. What will be interesting to see is when things happen like they did a little bit in the Spurs game, when suddenly for a period Spurs were pressing high up and Chelsea struggled a little bit in possession. Yeah. If more teams are brave enough or capable enough of doing that well, then we will see, and maybe that issue then will come into sharper focus and will also lead to the board and Tuchel thinking, okay, this is an area that we have to definitely address in the off season.
Yeah, and speaking of that Spurs game, he's shown in his first 5 games he will be pragmatic at times, and maybe be a little bit more secure. Partly maybe because the forwards are not banging in the goals at the moment, and you have to legislate for that. But also, is he a manager that, for your experience seeing him at Mainz, Dortmund, and PSG, is he a person that bases more going off the individual game, like you said, finding the solutions, getting results, more than trying to play progressive attacking football at all times when he's approaching football matches and just his time in general?
I don't think he would ever compromise and be completely reactive and park the bus. I think he will always try to find a way of playing attacking free-flowing football, fluid football, but the starting position might be a little bit deeper in some games. They might press a little bit differently. They might want to be a little bit more cute and secure. But I think the basic idea, the basic philosophy, if you will, although it's a word that I think is sometimes overused a little bit, it's pretty defined. I don't think it's going to change from that. And look, if you look at Chelsea, they're not really built to soak up the pressure. They're not. Yeah. It's not their game. Of course, you can just play 5 guys at the back and say, you know what, you now break us down. But they're best when they have the ball. They're best when they go forward. And I think Tuchel wants to play that way. And so far, I think the balance has been excellent because Chelsea have looked pretty solid defensively. Yeah. And if anything, I think the real improvement should come at the other end, where they'll be a bit more clinical up front, a bit more precise in their movement, and if they can keep the same balance and keep that defensive resilience but increase the output up front, then we're not far off from being a very, very good team in the Premier League.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, like we said, those results, 1 goal conceded in the 5 games, very little time to work with them. I mean, he barely landed before he had the Wolves game, so not even 24 hours to prepare. It's been impressive. Felix with a super chat is asking, in terms of, do you think Tuchel will ever go 2 up front in terms of his adaptation? We've seen playing a back 3, back 4, but going forward, do you think you can see a front 2? You remember those links with Haaland that were discussed earlier as well. Do you think there could be any change up front in terms of the way Tuchel approaches a match?
Well, I don't really see Tuchel playing 2 centre forwards in the number 9 mold. I don't see a Haaland Giroud or Haaland Tammy Abraham partnership. I don't think that's his game. But Werner could easily be that number 2 in a free role, coming in from the wing. That's his most effective role. That's how he played for Leipzig when he scored all those goals. So some kind of version of 2 up front is definitely on the cards. And Tuchel also wants movement and wants a lot of variety up front. So in that respect, yes. But if Haaland or somebody of that quality will be signed, I don't think it's to play alongside the existing number 9s, but actually to take that role for themselves and become the focal point up front.
Okay, and moving on to the board, because Tuchel obviously as well, separate section, 18-month contract. So a lot of Chelsea fans are worrying: is it short term? Is it long term? Is it more of a security situation? I think I saw a clause where potentially if he finishes top 4 this season, there could be an extension as well. So there's, maybe they're trying to cover themselves in terms of risk assessment, but knowing him from Mainz and then Dortmund and then PSG, there was a falling out over maybe potentially politics with Neymar and all of those things as well. You know how Chelsea are in terms of politics. You have to answer Marina. You've got Roman, obviously, as the owner. And obviously, there has been a little bit of politics in the Chelsea squad this season, not on the level of a Neymar, Mbappe, Cavani, not being allowed to take the penalties, all of these extra things. But just seeing how Tuchel's coped under pressure in terms of when he's losing games, and also with the club politics that is obviously going to come into play when Chelsea are not in this honeymoon period. What do you make of, how do you, is there a higher percentage, should I say, of him being able to get through it at Chelsea? Do you worry about that side of things?
Not really. I think 18 months is not long at all. I think the season is almost over. It's shaping up to be a successful season for him. What that means for Chelsea on the as a whole, for the team, it remains to be seen. But I think he's already shown that he can make a positive impact that will buy him then a bit more power, a bit more influence for next season. And then next season, he has to show that he can do even more. I think next season he needs to be competitive and really challenge for the title in the minds of the Chelsea hierarchy. So then we'll find out. But I think, even the best case scenario now for managers, 2, maybe 3 years. You very rarely get that longevity and that stability. I think it's helpful if you can. I think there's a reason why Guardiola and Klopp are so successful. They've been there for 5 years, 6 years, and that makes a big difference. But doesn't necessarily have to be that way. So I think there is a sense of realism in that contract deal. Of course, also financial considerations for Chelsea to be able to fire him a lot easier if they no longer think he's the right guy. But I wouldn't really worry about that so much, because ultimately, as Tuchel himself acknowledged, it comes down to results. If you get the results, if your team plays well, then you will be in the job and you'll sign new contracts. If not, they want to get rid of you. It doesn't really matter what the contract says. The only difference is that maybe your financial payoff will be slightly bigger.
Which is obviously always a thing that Chelsea are religiously having to continue to pay out. And so that again is probably risk assessment, not giving these guys long contracts. I think Lampard's contract was running out either this year or next year as well, or maybe this year with an option of a next. So they're definitely trying to be wiser in financial terms, and obviously the market with the pandemic makes sense going along with that. So it's only clever from the club. I want to move on to Spain. Chelsea have Atletico Madrid upcoming in the Champions League. I'm really looking forward to the game. I think it's going to be huge. Chelsea fans, of course, we're confident. We're enjoying life. We're going out on dates, as I've said, honeymoon period. But we are facing La Liga leaders, Atletico Madrid. I think they've definitely changed the way that they played this season. I really want to get in some detail about that. Luis Suarez is having a great season himself as well, top scorer with them, and obviously 42 goals conceded, but 12 conceded for them. So their defense, it's not like as if they've had to sacrifice their defense for their attack in La Liga. They've maybe just found a better balance. What have you just made of Atletico Madrid this season, and just how dangerous and how worried should we be obviously coming up against them?
I don't think Atletico are quite at the same level they were a few years ago, when they were very unlucky not to win the Champions League, when it was a nightmare playing against them. I think they give you a bit more space now. They give you a bit more opportunity to go forward to score goals. They're a bit more expensive, a bit more open, a bit more fun to watch. I saw them mostly in the Champions League, where they were good, but not super convincing. I think since then they've improved a lot. They found consistency in the league. They are by far the best team in Spain. But of course, that's also a relative assessment, because Real Madrid and Barcelona are pretty dire this season. So maybe that needs to be put into that context a little bit. I think Chelsea will feel that they're maybe slight underdogs in that game, but that Atletico give away chances and can be got at. I mean, a team that loses 4-0 in group stage against Bayern Munich is not unbeatable. As much as they can frighten you going forward, I think they give you an opportunity. And I think Tuchel will relish that chance. I don't think there is that much pressure on him. As long as Chelsea are positioned in the league to finish top 4, I think what happens in the Champions League is perhaps not quite as big a deal. And I think he'll be given a bit more time and leeway than perhaps another coach would have been at that point. I think for Lampard, for example, if he was still in charge now, Atletico Madrid was probably the game where things would be thumbs up or down. I think Tuchel will be in a very different situation if they continue to do well domestically. So I think it's probably a 60-40 kind of game. There's not much in it. It should be really fun. And I think Chelsea will feel that they have a realistic shot at doing this, but it won't be easy.
Yeah, maybe it's not the deciding factor in terms of his longevity of his contract afterwards. It's an interesting one because obviously he reached the final with PSG last season. A lot of people gave him credit for that run, and they said, wow, he was inches away really from getting the biggest competition in the world. A lot of people said that the draw was in his favor in having Atalanta and Leipzig on the way. And obviously, you have Neymar and Mbappe, those kind of stars in your team. Potentially, you are expected to reach that stage of the competition. That's what PSG were trying to build up to regardless. I mean, how much credit do you give him, for that run to the Champions League and his managerial credentials? How high do you rate them?
I give him a lot of credit for that, actually, because, if it had been so easy for PSG, why didn't they manage to do it before? I think you need to really get all those egos on board, make them play like a team. And I thought PSG, for all their issues that you mentioned, came the closest to actually playing like a functioning side in Lisbon. And if you look at the underlying stats of the final, they actually were a little bit unlucky to lose the game. They created better opportunities than Bayern, and they could have easily shaded that game. So, and then we'd be talking about someone in it, or we'd be talking about him in a very different kind of light. We'd be talking about him, the guy who has been, the savior of PSG, the guy that took him off the line, the guy who did for PSG what Jose did for Chelsea in a way, domestically at least. So, no, I would give him a lot of credit. And look, there's a reason why Chelsea and other clubs are interested in him, because they can look beyond a lost Champions League final, and they can look beyond the problems that he had with the sporting director, Leonardo, in Paris, and see that this is a guy whose teams play good football, whose teams tend to deliver, whose teams have players that improve individually when he's there, and he knows what he's doing. And I think that gives you a pretty good indication of how he's seen. Of course, Chelsea is a challenge. He needs to continue that under difficult circumstances. But I think so far, all the indications are that he's equal to the task. And if I was a Chelsea fan, I'd be very happy that Tuchel is in charge, because for all the flaws that you might have when it comes to getting on with with board members in the long run, etc., the bottom line, and this is something that people have told me again and again, even those who perhaps on a personal level are not his biggest fans, the bottom line is that this guy is a top manager. And that's why he's in the job.
Yeah. And we've kind of seen, obviously, tactics and all of that comes into play, but there are also outside factors that make a top coach. Of course, how you can relate with the fans. Obviously, they're not in the ground now, which is obviously maybe a good thing. Gives them a breathing room. Obviously, Frank Lampard departing a club legend. It gives you that time to focus on what happens on the pitch before the fans come back and you have to strike a relationship with them. I'm interested to see as well what you make of his media dealings, because I've been blown away personally. I'm starting to think he's not just media trained, but also almost has the playbook on how to deal with the British media. Because it's been fascinating for me to see that, one, yes, he's showing his character, but he's able to deal with difficult questions that he was posed with in the opening weeks or the opening fixtures, and then he was able to maybe get them on side, and now they're having conversations about food and wine and everything. I mean, what have you made about Tuchel's media dealings? Obviously, in his last press release, he kind of spoke about the need to incorporate the youth a lot, which is obviously goes in path with Chelsea's expectations and standards to bring through players for Cobham. We've seen the Cobham boys playing very well. So what have you made of him overall, just in terms of the way he deals with the media?
Well, Tuchel is a super smart guy, and he can be very, very charming when he wants to be. So, right now they're winning. He's the new guy. He's intriguing. He's a little bit exotic. People don't know that much about him. Everyone's happy. It won't always be like that. But you said difficult questions. I don't think there were any difficult questions for him, because nothing that anyone could ask him could cast any aspersions on his job at Chelsea. He hasn't even started yet. And I don't think he's fazed by prejudice or people, having a certain view of him. This guy is so, I think, secure in his own self-belief that he doesn't really pay too much attention what people think or do, which helps him then, I think, to be quite natural and relaxed in his dealings, because I don't think he sees it as something that is ultimately that important for him, how people report and what they say. In any case, it's going to be the same story all over again. As long as he keeps winning, there'll be very smiley and happy press conferences. Once he starts losing or things go well, then we'll see a different Thomas Tuchel side, and he's no different in that respect to all the big coaches. They all have that, I don't want to say dark side, but a very fierce, very competitive, short-tempered at times part of their personality, and we might get to see it at Chelsea at some stage as well.
Oh, I look forward to that, people. If you've been waiting for some drama, I'm sure it's not, hopefully not round the corner, but it will certainly happen at some point. It is Chelsea after all. The final two topics I want to get to before we wrap up, obviously, the half an hour special. I mean, I really want to look at Messi, because we spoke about the expectations in terms of Chelsea maybe trying to go for a league. One thing that seems to be under talked about is just how important that is. Really, I think Messi's involved in that. You talk about the best player in the world running out of contract. If he comes to the Premier League and goes to a Manchester City, he's been linked with PSG. But if he was to come to Man City, hypothetically, that maybe has to change the expectations of all the other top clubs in England, of how they, mark out their expectations for their managers in terms of going for the title. What have you made of just the Messi situation? Obviously, the wages he's on, and obviously the presidential elections. Do you think that will have any influence on whether he stays or goes? And obviously, do you think he can potentially come to England?
I think it's possible, but I don't think it would necessarily change the equation so much. I mean, Messi is still brilliant, but you're not getting the Messi in your prime, and you're getting Messi at a cost where even the Manchester Cities and Manchester Uniteds then might have to say, hypothetically, I don't think Manchester United are in for him at all, but I'm just saying, okay, we sign Messi, then we can't sign the other guy. We can't sign a Haaland, or we can't sign a Sancho. So I don't think it's going to move the needle all that much. And if you remember about the situation in Spain, the fact that Messi was there didn't necessarily reduce the pressure on Real Madrid to win, because Real Madrid felt that they should be above such considerations. And I'm sure Chelsea, maybe, in months to come, will feel that they're in a similar situation where they can win with or without Messi lining up against them. So I don't know. First of all, I don't think it's bound to happen yet that he is leaving Barcelona. Secondly, even if he were to leave Barcelona, I am not so sure that the Premier League is a natural destination for him, nor that he would be able to replicate the kind of form that we saw in recent years. I think it's getting to the point where things will be a little more difficult for him. So I doubt that he'll be such a game changer if it were to happen.
Okay, it's an interesting one, because obviously, I mean, just as a neutral, if I was to go from a neutral perspective, players like Ronaldinho and Messi, they never really seem to come to the Premier League, even R9. So it would be nice to see it. However, I'm not going to get my hopes up too much from the neutral perspective. Finally, on the German national team, obviously, I feel like Chelsea, with Tuchel in charge, potentially will start to look maybe more Bundesliga talents, more German talents. We've seen, obviously, Kai Havertz come in, Timo Werner. No coincidence now that they appoint someone that potentially knows how to get the best out of them, a little bit more of the experience of coming up against them in league. Tony Rudiger as well has come back into the fold and has been a mainstay in the team. With Lowe, first of all, a question from Nishal, who do you think will be his successor, and also his centre-back duo, who do you think is their first choice? Is Rudiger still part of that?
Well, I mean, Löw wants to stay on until the World Cup, and he will only be allowed to do so if Germany have a really strong showing at the Euros. And I think that still is doubtful, unfortunately. They have a difficult group and things are not really working that well. So it could come to the point where the whole of Germany kind of decides, okay, thank you, Yogi, it's been great, but we need a change. And then it's a question of who's available. I think Hansi Flick is someone that the German FA would love to have because he's already worked for them and he's easygoing and he gets along with the players, but we don't know what the situation with Bayern will be like at that point. There is Ralf Rangnick potentially still available. I think he'd be an amazing choice for Germany because he will also be able to oversee some of the structural changes that the German FA and German football on the whole, I think, need to undergo to be competitive again. So these kind of names will be in the mix. I don't think it's realistic to think of Nagelsmann or Tuchel or Klopp to take the job in 2022. So that leaves us, I think, with Rangnick being the best man for the job. Be very interesting to see if that's going to come to pass. As far as centre-back pairings is concerned, I think Niklas Süle is probably the one first name on the sheet as far as the centre defenders is concerned, and then it's a bit of a fight for that second spot. There's Matthias Ginter, there's Toni Rüdiger, there's maybe even Mats Hummels, although I don't believe that he'll be recalled. But a lot of people are saying Löw should get over himself and do it. They are kind of decent players like Jonathan Tah, but perhaps nobody quite outstanding or consistent enough to know that he's going to be an automatic starter. And that in a way is Germany's problem. You don't really have, and even Süle is somebody who's just coming back from injury. You don't really have those big, strong, very secure, very solid defenders at the back, and you couldn't even exclude the fullbacks in that conversation. And that's one of the reasons why Germany have struggled and will probably continue to struggle all the way.
Sadly. Well, Raf, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Of course, it's important that we keep an eye on the Bundesliga people, because I feel like Chelsea's transfer strategy is very heavily Bundesliga focused at the moment. We've been linked with Sancho, Haaland, everyone centre-back wise from the Bundesliga as well. So, in the coming months, maybe the summer window, we'll see Tuchel is heavily backed and how it goes. I mean, Raf, the people already know who you are, of course, but let them know any upcoming pieces you have with the Athletic coming out. And obviously, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much. I mean, all my written stuff is on the Athletic. There's podcasts with the Athletic as well, the Starcast and the European show. I'll be on CBS as well during the Europa League, and maybe bits and pieces during the Champions League as well. Just keep an eye out on the Twitter feed. If you haven't enough of me after this half an hour and you want more, I doubt it. But if you do somehow, you know where to find me.
Thank you so much. And like I said, it's been an absolute pleasure. One of the world's biggest reporters and journalists with us on this show. So it's been an absolute blessing. And people, thank you so much for joining me. Over 400 of you with us live. And of course, this is going to go up as well with all the links in the description after we finish processing. Join us again tomorrow as we're going to start looking towards the game against Newcastle on Monday. And people, thank you so much. I'll see you guys in a bit.